All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos on this channel, and we focus on great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, and we try to do deep dives into them, be thorough, and figure out how to use these things well in our own lives for our paradigm shifting, our quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health, our awakening to 5D consciousness, our formation of a holistic worldview, and maybe any other uses that you might be able to put to these things. Today is the 82nd video that we have done on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Daniel Ingram. And he goes into, I'd say, mainly the core teachings of the Buddha, not Buddhism per se, because Buddhism is probably the core teachings of the Buddha wrapped up in a lot of fluff, a lot of marketing, a lot of egotism, and hero worship or guru worship, and a lot of everybody's neurotic stuff, as Ingram calls it. But the core teachings are what we can use in our own lives, regardless of what religion, if any, that we subscribe to. And those are particularly teachings in morality, ethics, which you can, get in a lot of different places, but also teachings on meditation, two kinds of meditation: concentration meditation on an object, and as you gain proficiency in doing that, you cycle through the jhanas, basically states of consciousness, and they kind of become more and more exotic, and many of them are intensely blissful. And so they can kind of help you to motivate you to keep meditating. But then there is also insight meditation, which is meditation based on your opening up to your five senses and your mental impressions or your mental sensations, what they call the six sense doors, and investigating those sensations for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. All of our sensations are not us. They are not satisfactory. They bring on suffering. And they are not permanent. They are arising and passing away. And as we recognize that more and more, we cycle through these stages of insight. And we can cycle through multiple times, and every time that we move through a cycle, at least for the first several, we enlighten ourselves by degrees, meaning that we kind of tune into reality and gain more and more wisdom, which is not a panacea. It's not going to make you glow in the dark. It's not going to give you charisma. It's not going to make you, you won't be able to know how many hairs you have on your head. You won't be able to, jump off a cliff and fly. But you will be able to move through life with a realistic perspective on reality. Okay, so we are in, we just got into kind of his autobiographical section, which he says he kind of grudgingly put into the second volume of this book. In the first volume, it was a very abbreviated autobiographical section, but here he goes into pretty serious detail about how he came to kind of be gung-ho on grasping insight meditation, and spending months, many months in monasteries in the Far East doing 18 hours a day of meditation, and searching endlessly for tips and techniques to help him with that. Okay, so we're right in the middle of this, so let's start here where we left off. There are other problems created for the person being put on the pedestal, of which the temptation to exploit the naivete, body, and wallet of the person putting them on the pedestal is only the most obvious, but not necessarily the worst. In my view, just as bad is that the person on the pedestal is now cut off from acknowledging some part of their flawed humanity, as it doesn't fit the idealized story and role dynamic the two people are generating, such that they become less able to be with who they are. This creates the inevitable shadow sides, as they are called, and shadow sides nearly always cause trouble, coming out in ways that the person now can't recognize, as the people on the pedestal and the people who put them there are cut off from the ability to see their causes clearly due to buying into the transference and countertransference that shadow sides and shadow dynamics create and reinforce. Positive transference and countertransference also have this nasty way of flipping to negative transference and countertransference when the honeymoon phase wears off. This is also common in all relationships, marriages, dating situations, workplaces, and the like. We realize the other person is less perfect than we imagine them to be, and then we get angry at them for that, even though they were ordinary the whole time, and we were just busy idealizing them. Further, the shadow sides created by transference and countertransference and the nearly inevitable bad behavior that follows often makes the person on the pedestal worse than when the two started this strange dance of delusion. I assert that the fall wouldn't likely be as hard if expectations, disclosures, and reality testing had been better early on. And so we arrive at the reason for presenting the material in this section about my own life, flaws, successes, failures, quirks, and conditioning that led to what you are now reading. I hope that this lessens transference and countertransference to some degree, such that you and I will both benefit in our own lives and practices. I hope that you will be able to draw on your own power, stand on your own 2 feet, own your own practice, and have your successes and failures at the forefront of your mind, thus reducing the problems that projection, transference, and countertransference cause. I hope that I will be empowered to keep sharing freely and honestly my Dharma practice and life with all its successes and failures among my co-adventurers on the path of the Dharma. So, some will use transference and countertransference unskillfully, giving rise, as mentioned, to abuse and degradation from the individual level all the way to the systemic and entrenched institutional levels. There are those who can, however, navigate transference and countertransference skillfully, using it to push students and clients to disentangle themselves and find their own power, investigate their own experience, and stand on their own 2 feet without being too wrapped up in the other person. I must admit that my abilities in the skillful use of transference and countertransference basically suck. So I do my best to avoid them as much as possible and instead substitute a coarse and sometimes goofy honesty for what otherwise might be a much better show. The use of transference and countertransference is always an imperfect business. There will always be flaws in the way this is handled on both sides. Very few individuals have enough knowledge of themselves and of the people they are interacting with, or of the myriad causal factors of this exceedingly complex world we live in, to know precisely the optimal way to handle transference and countertransference in all contexts. That said, with more data, more awareness of ourselves and those we are interacting with, perhaps such interactions and dynamics can proceed more skillfully. While in the first edition I tried to leave out a lot of details relating to my own life and practice, it turns out that this caused a few significant problems. First, to fill in the gaps relating to details that I failed to provide, many people projected all sorts of strange notions from their own fantasies onto what they imagined my life and practice had been. In other words, many people made up all sorts of seemingly random stuff to justify whatever reaction they had to the book, positive or negative, and some of this craziness got spread around on the web. Second, I realized that by not telling parts of my story, I failed to remember and then to present techniques, concepts, and other details that were extremely helpful to me as I began trying to learn these practices. As it turns out, I seem to remember certain details of practice and useful tips and techniques that were relevant to my early practice experience, only when asked about or when reminiscing on those aspects of my life. Thus, for those who are curious for whatever reason, here is a very condensed, edited, summarized, abridged version of the story as I best remember it. I realize that we all color the past and interpret it through experiences that happen later, as well as modify it due to our current agendas. And I have likely done that here to some degree, though I promise this is my best attempt to write something that is as truthful as it can possibly be. I've been careful to protect the privacy of people whose journeys overlapped or intersected with mine in some way, but whom I presume wouldn't want their personal stories readily accessible to anyone and everyone. I have therefore tried to focus on the practical details that might help you, the reader, do something useful with this material. That concern for privacy does mean that I have had to edit out some good material that might have had explanatory or pragmatic value, but hopefully the ethics of respecting privacy are worth that. My apologies to anyone who thinks this is just me blowing my own horn. I hope it doesn't come off that way, as that is not my intent. That said, there are things that I have done about which I rejoice, and if anything in the way I present this annoys you, I am sincerely sorry. All right, enough disclaimers, so begins the tale. Chapter 43, The Early Years. The first few things I can remember in my life that seem to relate to meditation are two memories from the time I was approximately 3 years old. I can date most of my memories, including those from my early childhood, to the specific places in which they occurred, as my family moved around a lot. The first memory is of standing by a bed of flowers outside our rented house in a little suburb outside of Boston, and suddenly having this extremely strong impression that I should be able to know all the Latin names for all those flowers and the other plants in the yard, and realizing that I had forgotten them. It was nerve-wracking, as it felt like that knowledge had been there in the past, and I realized I couldn't access it, as though it was slipping or fading away. Past life experience? Some other fanciful ideation in the mind of a young child? Hard to say for sure, but I had the distinct impression that Latin plant classification was something that at some point in the past I had done very, very well. And I can still recall distinctly exactly where I was and what that moment and the frustration of those fading memories felt like at that time. The second memory is from around the same time. I was lying on my parents' bed downstairs on their white down comforter and began tuning in to the sensations of breathing and feeling bliss flood my body. Gradually, this turned into a very wonderful, silent, neutral peace with a specific, all-pervading feeling tone. I also had the distinct memory just then that I had done this before. I'm quite sure that was the last time for decades that I consciously dropped into those states, though I don't know why I quit accessing them. Some 22 years later, while on retreat in Bodh Gaya with Christopher Titmuss and his fine crew, and just shortly after experiencing stream entry, I would shift to doing jhana practice just to see if I could, and wham, the jhanas showed up in order from the first through the eighth. Remembering jhanas are the states of mind that we go through during concentration meditation. So he got stream entry, that's insight meditation. And then he shifted over to doing jhana practice or concentration meditation. When it was over, there was the strong recognition, aha, those states I got into when I was 3 or 4 years old that I vividly remember were the first 4 jhanas. Those who didn't get into jhanas when they were young, or at least don't remember this, may think it unlikely that I got into those states, but it turns out that in detailed conversations with various seasoned meditators, it is not so uncommon for kids to be able to do this, and then lose the ability as they get older, possibly to rediscover it again sometime later. This has made me speculate that it might be easy to teach kids the jhanas, and that with practice, they might be able to retain these from childhood through periods when they would come in handy, such as adolescence and into adulthood. It's very interesting. There are many things that I have some residual resentment about, among the biggest of which is being brought up in a world where meditative technology and theory were not well established, mainstream, or widely incorporated into standard daily life and especially education. Yeah, if you haven't watched this channel, I've done like 580 some videos on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. It's an all-encompassing theory ranging from physics to chemistry to astronomy to psychology and religion, all based on the same theory, which is based on space and time being reciprocals of each other and being together in motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. And if you talk to a physicist about that stuff, they just reject it right out of hand. But I do believe that it could be easily taught to children. Maybe not small children like he's talking about here, but students before they begin taking any science classes. It could be the basis for their science classes because it gives you a fundamental of all the sciences. And so like 8th graders, 7th graders, or something like that, but possibly even younger. The same is true of sacred geometry, especially synergetic geometry from Buckminster Fuller, which we'll be covering eventually here on this channel in depth. But it's a lot easier to teach things before they so you don't have to unlearn anything. You know, that's the problem with adult education, is that we've all been, our minds have all been poisoned so badly that we have to unlearn so much stuff just to make room for the stuff that's valid, or at least potentially valid. Anyway, back to the text. When I was around 7 or 8, my mother often used to play an album called Free to Be You and Me by Marlo Thomas and Friends. Marlo Thomas was the that girl from, I think, the 1970s sitcom. And I don't even know if it was a sitcom or just kind of like a drama. Its light, hippie-inspired children's songs matched the album title perfectly, a message born of the late 60s that proclaimed you can and should be yourself, who you are, as you are, and the album promoted this as a high ideal. As perfectly natural and easy as this initially sounds, it is not actually that easy an ideal to live up to in practice, as anyone who has tried has figured out. Still, I believe that as a young child, something of that message helped me later to be a better insight practitioner, as being with what is going on and who you actually are right then is a core message of insight practice. I attended a hippie-run Quaker school from the 2nd grade through the 4th grade in Durham, North Carolina. I wonder if that's like the Friends School. What's the other one there? I used to live in that area. There's another one called it's a Steiner school. What are those Steiner schools called? Well, this is a Quaker school. I think the Friends School is a Quaker school. So anyway, every morning, sorry, this is bringing up memories for me too, because he grew up in the same area that I didn't grow up. I went to graduate school in that area. So anyway, and lived there for like 20 years. Every morning, we all sit in silence for 10 minutes. I found this generally very difficult and remember feeling a tremendous restlessness and irritation. We weren't given any specific technique that I remember. We were just told to sit quietly. Looking back, I think that those daily sessions of silent sitting provided me with a sort of conditioning and training that helped later, though I certainly didn't appreciate this at the time. In 4th grade, I remember taking a very cool elective course, cleverly called Close Encounters, that involved all kinds of interesting experiences, such as playing with a nifty analog synthesizer. That's pretty cool. But the most important parts of that class were the meditations. Imagine taking an elective class in 4th grade, I guess. I remember us, my elective class would be recess. Okay, I remember us all lying on the floor of the class and being given various meditation instructions, such as what is now referred to as progressive relaxation, where you move your attention gradually from your toes to your head while systematically tensing and relaxing the muscles and feeling warm light flooding into those relaxed areas until you visualize your whole body filled with yellow light. I also remember a meditation in which we visualized ourselves getting tiny and walking around the inside of our bodies, checking things out, relaxing, and healing any points of tension, then visualizing ourselves growing bigger and bigger until we were as huge as the entire universe. I don't remember any particularly earth-shattering experiences during those sessions, but I am certain that the class formed the basis of the meditative exercises that I came up with that got me across the arising and passing away later. I'm sure. One of the most one of the next formative events was my introduction to a book called The Dancing Woolly Masters by Gary Zukav during my 8th grade science class taught by Mr. Smith. That book turned me on, too, to a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't have an 8th grade science teacher teaching me that. I had to find it by myself, maybe just after I finished college, probably. Okay, anyway, the book is part of the first wave of books that tie together particle physics, quantum mechanics, and Eastern philosophy and mysticism. I read the book cover to cover many times. It not only was fascinating from a science geek point of view, but it clearly pointed out profound discrepancies between how materialist science explains the world and how humans perceive it. These discrepancies rankled me profoundly. It seemed extremely hypocritical of me to actively believe that I was some separate, static, in-control person when physics clearly showed that I was a totally fluxing field of naturally resolving probability fields. Obviously, these are strange thoughts for a young teenager. Those seeds that were planted would begin to bloom shortly in my home-brewed dream practice, later becoming the foundation of heated debates in college, and would continue to haunt me until 2003, when Buddhist meditation practices gave me a way to finally resolve this paradigm perception conflict. Okay, this section is called The Arising and Passing Away. I began having lucid dreams and flying dreams when I was probably about 5 years old. This again is dated by the house in Raleigh, North Carolina that I lived in then. I vividly remember my first flying dream ever, in which I suddenly could swim up into the air. The feeling was amazing, and I instantly became a huge fan of those dreams. This, combined with the instructions I received in my 4th grade course, seems to form the basis of what happened when I was about 14 or 15. Again, I know this by the house that we moved to. I remember lying in bed one night thinking, wow, I want to have more flying dreams. Maybe if I practice having them before I go to sleep, I will have more of them. So, before going to sleep, I began playing around with visualizing flying around in space between large planets that looked more like 50-foot wide billiard balls of different colors, red, white, black, etc. I don't know if you ever tried to visualize things clearly, but if you have and you are like most people, you likely found out what I did. Visualization is hard to do, at least if you are trying to evoke a lifelike image. There are all sorts of subtleties and complexities. There seemed to be a slight and annoying delay between the intention to visualize and the images showing up. There were strange perceptual distortions. As I made the effort to visualize, the tension in my face was distracting and seemed to make it harder to get deeper into the visualization. The more effort I made, the more attention was taken up by the effort rather than by the flying itself. But relaxing too much made the visualization fade. There was an alternating between the side that seemed to be visualizing and the images themselves, which messed up the images. I went through a phase where my hands seemed to feel big and my lips and face felt big. Something I would later learn is called the homunculus, which relates to the way that the brain maps physical sensations, and it turns out it is a first jhana territory thing. At points and for brief periods, the visualization got very clear, though not so clear as a full out-of-body experience, but moderately passable as the experience of actually practicing flying between visualized planets, like a very strong daydream. At other points, it was very frustrating and tense. In short, I managed to get through the first 3 insight stages and had no idea I had done so. Those are mind and body, cause and effect, and the 3 characteristics. So those are the first 3 insight stages, which are kind of perfunctory. The rising and passing away, the 4th stage, is kind of like the first milestone, big milestone. What happened next would totally change my life in profound ways. But given that I had no vocabulary or conceptual framework to characterize what happened, this unforgettable experience got placed in a mental file of experiences that were completely outside anything that seemed to relate to the rest of my life, except that it totally did relate to the rest of my life, but in ways that I wouldn't begin to understand until I was 25 years old and meditating in a monastery in Malaysia. While the United States often thinks of itself as the world leader in nearly all technologies, I can tell you for certain that we are at least 2,500 years behind when it comes to meditative technologies and their taxonomy. But with Ingram's book and my videos and other people who are trying to spread this out, maybe we can close that gap here a little bit. Back to my quest, which wasn't a quest yet. I remember this very lucid dream I had a few nights into my flying dream practice, like it was yesterday. In the dream, I was standing on a long, straight, dusty road lined with large, wild rose bushes. The actual street that I was dreaming I was on is called Cobblestone Place, and it is in Cannondale, Connecticut, just behind a house that used to belong to my grandmother, in case you are curious. In real life, those rose bushes were planted by my late Uncle Alan, and the road is not that long, but in the dream it was. It is also the road on which I would first learn to drive a car a year or 2 later. In the dream, I was about 3 feet tall, wearing a silver spacesuit with a glass globe helmet, and standing next to me were 2 similarly dressed, similarly short people, all staring into the distance down the road. We were all holding silver ray guns in our hands. The sun was beating down so brightly that the landscape and colors were washed out in that brightness, with everything hued somewhere between white and yellow, with a